everybody. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited about today. Every year it seems that the Hunger Action Conference gets better, and I think this year is no exception, thanks to the amazing staff at the Vermont Foodbank who put together this day for us. I want to welcome you all to Killington, and say it was really great to see those of you who were here last night. We started a couple of years ago having a little reception the night before, and I really encourage everyone here next year, if you can, come the night before. Well, it's just a really delightful opportunity to sit down and have a more in-depth conversation. You know, I was thinking as I went back to refill my coffee cup and walking back up here, I just want to sit at every table and have a conversation. Because every time I do, I learn something, and I want to learn a lot more from all of you. So it kind of feels like your own wedding, you know, all the guests are there. And you really want to talk to everybody, but you just don't have the chance. So I love this opportunity to connect with partners, new and old, and hear your stories and hear the stories of our neighbors that we're helping every single day, and their triumphs and challenges, because that's really what it's all about. It's especially great to be in Killington, not only because it's a beautiful day, and actually there is skiing and boarding today and tomorrow, so you brought your equipment. Probably swimming too, maybe even swimming on the slopes. But it's really exciting to be in Killington because the Vermont Foodbank has just opened a new distribution center in downtown Rutland, right down the road. And we are so excited to be physically part of this community, finally. We've been working on it for a long time and thinking about it for a lot longer than that. If you go into the back where all the tables are set up, there's one for our operations folks, and they actually have a little video of a day at the food bank, which is really nice to watch, actually. And part of it, though, is a tour of all of our facilities, and you can see the Rutland facility and the work that's going in the 30 by 60 foot, this enormous produce cooler that we're building there. You can also visit Raffle's table, and Raffle is our partner in that facility to make sure we can get lots and lots of fresh local produce to fill up that cooler and get distributed to all of our partners in this region and really all over the state. The focus of our gathering today is the link between hunger, nutrition, and health. It may seem obvious to those of us in the room because we see that link every day in the people that we're serving. But there's a lot of exciting new research going on and a lot of data being gathered that are giving us new medical and biological insights into nutrition and health and the effects of hunger. And we'll be learning a lot about that this morning and later today. Before we get started, I want to thank our lead sponsors, the Vermont Community Foundation's Farm and Food Initiative, the New England Dairy Council, and the New England Dairy Promotion Board, and all our other sponsors. The tables are in the back. They have great displays. Please, when you have a chance, stop by, see what people have to talk about, sit, listen, learn, get some materials. Right now, I would like to ask Janet McLaughlin, who is the Special Projects Director and Farm and Food Coordinator for the Vermont Community Foundation, to come up and share some thoughts. Janet came to the VCF not too long ago, 2 years, almost 2 years ago, from Share Our Strength, which many of you probably know, an organization, national organization dedicated to ending childhood hunger. And there, Janet directed the Cooking Matters program. So she really gets what we do, and I'm really excited that she's here today. So Janet, please come up.
Thank you, John. I'm not going to try to... Can people hear me okay? Yep. Okay, great. So, it's so wonderful to be here today and to be here with all of you. really, I do share your compassion for Vermonters who are facing hunger and your passion for connecting them with the healthy food that they need. I love being with the anti-hunger community because this is a group of people who saw their neighbors in need, saw a problem in their communities, and said, what can I do to help, and just got to it. And are working every day with rolling up their sleeves and working to make a difference. So I just really love being a part of the anti-hunger community, so I really appreciate the chance to be here with you today. In my previous job at Share Our Strength, I probably visited at least 30 different food banks all across the country. So I've seen a lot of them. I've seen a lot of walk-in coolers. I've seen a lot of stacks of pallets. I've seen a lot of trucks. And there's a couple of things that stand out to me about the Vermont Food Bank. The first is really the team spirit that I feel from the staff at the food bank. It's just a really wonderful group of people. And the second is the food bank's commitment to learning about what works, learning from their network partners, learning from the best research in the field, and just always trying to consider how to meet the needs of Vermonters at risk of hunger in better, more effective ways. And I think that commitment to learning is really exemplified in the high quality of these hunger action conferences. So I'm really looking forward to learning with you all today. I am here on behalf of the Vermont Community Foundation, and I imagine that there's some of you who know us quite well and some of you who have never heard of us at all. So I wanted just to give you a quick snippet into how it is that we support Vermont's nonprofit community. So there's really three main pieces of what we do to keep Vermont healthy and vital. So the first is that we encourage generous Vermonters to support Vermont's social sector by offering financial vehicles through which they can give and philanthropic advising services. And the Vermont Food Bank is absolutely one of our fund holders' favorite causes to support. Second, we offer grant-making programs that provide direct support to Vermont's nonprofit community. That's probably how most of you know us. And third, we work to strengthen the economic foundation of nonprofits by providing the opportunity to work with us to create endowments that will provide world-class investment returns and to partner with us to provide comprehensive planned giving services. So we work in those three ways. But we also recognize that we're working at this unique juncture between many of Vermont's philanthropists and Vermont's nonprofits. And working at that state level, we have an unusual vantage point on the needs and the opportunities that are in the state. And we see our role as helping connect people and mobilize resources on issues that are really important. The creation of a fair and sustainable local food system in Vermont is one of those issues. It's really important to the health of our people, our lands, our communities. And about 3 years ago, the staff of the Community Foundation started to explore this issue more, and we really saw that disconnect between the amazing work that's happening around local foods and the enthusiasm for local foods in the state, and those people who could really benefit most from some of that healthy local food. And so we established our Food and Farm Initiative to connect that growing local foods movement with the fight against hunger and poverty. Much of the work that we've supported to date has been in farm-to-school related work, which is a proven way to get healthy food to kids in need right now and also educate our next generation of food buyers. But we're also very proud to support the food bank. Through a partnership with Vermont Restaurant Week, which just ended, the Food and Farm Initiative matched the first $5,000 that was raised. And we're really proud to be sponsoring this conference and the conversation that we're going to be having about connecting all Vermonters with the healthy food that they need. So thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for all that you do.
Does that work? Thank you, Janet. Thank you. The Vermont Community Foundation is a great resource and support, I think, not just to organizations of the size of the Vermont Food Bank, but organizations like all of yours in the room today. So I would urge you to take a look at what the Community Foundation can do for you and talk to Janet. She's a great resource for making connections from all over the state. I'm going to indulge myself for a couple of minutes here, and I know our Hunger Action Conference theme this year is the connection, the link between hunger, nutrition, and health. We're going to hear a lot about that throughout the day. But I want to talk for a minute about something else. I want to talk about failure. I don't know if you can read the cartoon on the screen, but it's a Dilbert, and Wally is asking about failure. And telling the boss that failure is the raw material of success. And you know, Wally's right. You know, what I hear, one of the truisms in business success these days is fail fast, fail often. Well, I would say we have, in a sense, failed. The war on poverty we've just had its 50th anniversary. And as the New York Times and other publications have said, it's a mixed bag when you look at the outcomes. But we failed, I think, incorrectly, because we haven't failed fast enough. And we haven't used that failure as the raw material of success. In fact, more often than not, we use that failure as the raw material for recrimination and blame in our society. So now, I've said failure 10 times, at least, and brought us all down a little bit. So, what's the upside here? Where's the inspiration? Well, the first thing is that we need to stop doing the same thing that we did for the last 50 years and expect different results. We really need to think about the change. We need to listen, to really, really listen to our neighbors when they come into our food shelf or our meal site. I was talking to Sandy from Chester last night, and she was telling me some stories about the neighbors that come in to the food shelf in Chester and the conversations that she has and the connections she can make. Sometimes people are angry. Their lives are not going well, and they have to come and ask for help. And they're angry, and they come in and you're trying to help, and they're being mean and nasty. Well, you know, what do we do? What do you do in that situation? You know, I don't want us to look like Baltimore, where really nobody really listened until those angriest kids started setting fires and throwing rocks. Let's not wait for that. Let's fully engage our ears, our hearts, and our minds. Let's not get angry or despair. Instead, let's get curious. Why is what's happening? Try something different tomorrow when you go back. If that doesn't work, go ahead and fail. It's okay. Fail fast. Adjust. Try something else. And when something else works, share it. Call me, email me, write me a letter. Let me know what you failed at, and then what you did, and how it worked. And then we as the Vermont Foodbank, as our role, we can share that with everybody here. And you know what? If we keep doing that, we can't help but find a solution to hunger, not only in this state, but all across the country. So I want to thank you all for the work that you do. This is absolutely a symbiotic relationship. There is no Vermont Foodbank without our 225 network partners who are out there interfacing with our hungry neighbors every single day. And likewise, I know that the Vermont Foodbank is an essential source of good, nutritious food for you and for our neighbors out there. So thank you all for all that you do. I really appreciate it. Now, we're all looking for creative ways to increase opportunity for our neighbors, and that's really what today's about. Good health is a concept that we can all support. People, whether you're rich or not, understand and respond to, do you want to be healthy? People say, yes, I want to be healthy. Fortunately, today we have an expert on the relationship between lifelong health and nutrition, from womb to tomb, as they say. I'm really thrilled to announce Dr. Bob Murray from Ohio State University is going to speak to us about the relationship between lifelong health and nutrition, starting from the womb and taking us into aging. Dr. Murray has spent over 20 years in the field of pediatric gastroenterology and nutrition. He is a professor of human nutrition at the Ohio State University of Columbus. During his career, Dr. Murray has consistently been an advocate for the importance of health and nutrition and a focus on child nutrition. And we were talking before the conference, he was telling me about his work with childhood obesity, really back before it was an issue that everybody talked about, and the changes that have been taking place in our society and in our children. He established the Center for Healthy Weight and Nutrition at Nationwide Children's Hospital, which provided surgical options for the pediatric obese population. He served for 10 years and is the past chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council of School Health. He's been a member of the board for Action for Healthy Kids and the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics Foundation. Dr. Murray is a strong supporter of the safety net of which you are a part, as ensuring the long-term health of our communities. And it's with great pleasure that I pass it over to Dr. Murray.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Great place to have a conference.
Yes.
People can't get you here when you're like 2 hours from everything. You know, John was talking this morning, and I was thinking back a few weeks ago. I was a teenager when America discovered the fact that there was hunger. There was actually a report done in the 1960s, and America was shocked that we had real serious problems with hunger, and particularly that children were hungry. I don't know if any of the gray hairs remember, but when Bobby Kennedy went to Appalachia and talked to those kids and asked them if they'd had breakfast, you could see this rich guy from Hyannisport talking to these kids, and he was absolutely devastated. Theodore Sorensen said that visit changed Bobby Kennedy's whole life. He was completely shocked. And so, you know, we look back, and I do hear people talk about failure as if the safety net has failed, but I think the recession was a real clear evidence that it doesn't fail. You know, we didn't go through what they went through in the Great Depression. We didn't have people out on the street, you know, living out of their cars. We didn't have kids that were chronically hungry. That safety net we built, even if it has frays and flaws in it, was strong, and it held, and it's really gotten our population through the last 5 years, which was a very, very tough time. So I think the work that you do, we should look at that recession as evidence that we've done a good job, and then begin to look forward to where we want to go next, because there's a lot of things from science that we've learned that I think we could apply to make that safety net stronger. We're going to talk about some of that this morning. I want to talk particularly about the brain. We've learned a lot about the brain in the last decade or so, just very, very quickly, as brain science has emerged. We've learned a lot about how children's brain develop, how it's maintained over a lifetime, and why, when they get to be my age, that we can't remember our Social Security number. You know, what's going wrong here? But nutrition plays a huge role in that, and I want to show you specifically where that comes into play. First of all, I do a lot of work for different groups that promote nutrient-rich foods. Dairy Council is one. I've talked at a number of hunger conferences like this one. And I do a lot of medical writing on nutrition as well. But just so you know, Sabra hummus and avocado and all kinds of different things I've worked on. So when I was in medical school, it wasn't all that long ago, and even into the late 90s, we thought that a person's genes from mom and dad dictated who they were, their personality, their attitude, their ability to learn, their whole kind of life trajectory was set by their genes. And we also knew that socioeconomics played a big role in dampening down the possibilities that were in that gene. But that was the extent of it. We really thought this was a genetic thing. But what we've learned in the last 10 or 12 years is that there are other factors that play a big role in that trajectory, and that trajectory is alterable, can be changed if we do the right thing. And this is an absolutely fascinating thing that's just happening in science now. So, I can't hardly see my own slides here. Let me do this instead so I can come out here and just see these things. So one of the things that we learned, and the threads of this began about 30 years ago, they realized that adults who had cardiovascular disease had very similar stories of abnormal growth during pregnancy. So a lot of them were either born small and then grew to be obese and have cardiovascular disease, or they were born very large and they got in trouble. We're seeing a lot more of that now in this generation. And so they started to study that. It was called the fetal origins of adult disease, and it seems very strange to me. When I first heard this thing, I thought, how is it possible that what happened to a fetus during pregnancy can influence hypertension and abnormal lipids and cardiovascular disease when they're 40 and 50 years old? What's the link there? Well, the literature has opened up all kinds of different possibilities. This is called epigenetics, and they've studied all of these things, including mental health, and risk can be layered in to pregnancy. So what happens to mom happens to the baby, whether it's nutrition, physical activity, fitness, or some stress or mental or physical stress on mom, that is also happening to the baby. And it alters their development, and it alters the trajectory of their life. So it's a risk. It doesn't mean that they're ruined for life. It's a risk that's layered on there in a number of different things. I don't know if yeah. So what we learned was that there's genes, and we have two genes, mom and dad, they contribute to our genes, and those are fixed, and they don't change. But what does change is something called epigenetics. These environmental stresses, the environmental experiences that we have, actually change the way that the genes turn on or turn off. You know, the purpose of the genes is to make proteins, to make all the building blocks of the body, all the chemicals, everything's all made from this genetic code over here. But if you think about it like a chess set, okay, you've got a certain number of squares on the board, you have a certain number of players on there, and they all have different ways of moving on the chess set, but it's all very finite when you start. But how you play those different pieces and the way that the game unfolds has everything to do with an infinite number of possible games that can be played. It's exactly the case here. If during kidney development something adverse happens and the kidney doesn't form well, that could lead to hypertension in adulthood because the kidney has a limited capacity. And as we get older, we stress it, and then we begin to see hypertension. You don't see that in the baby, you see it in the adult. Very interesting connection. So epigenetics, if you see this term, it's talked about more and more, we're realizing it's not the genes, it's the epigenes, it's the stresses, it's the environmental impact on the genes that alters so much of what happens to the child. So, oh, is that better? Okay, good. Wander like a bedouin. Thanks. Okay. So one of the things they learned, they studied babies, and they first were interested in baby. Oh, this is even on.
Test, can you guys hear that?
Yes.
Closer to your mouth.
So they first looked at babies in World War II who had been born to mothers who had gone through real serious hunger, like 800 calorie a day hunger. You know, pregnant moms should be getting 2,500 calories a day. These moms are getting 800 to 1,000. They studied those babies and found as they grew, they were obese, they had heart disease, they had diabetes at a higher rate of speed. They later went on and studied overnutrition, excess weight gain, and saw very similar things. It's another epigenetic change that occurred to the baby. And then they even looked at specific nutrients. If I just change the protein, you get very similar effects because protein was necessary. The quality of the nutrition was necessary to drive optimal development of the baby. The changes that take place occur all over the body because, as you can imagine, the fetus is developing everything at one time. Brain and heart and skeleton, and all of these things change. But one of the things they found is that the real core was this metabolic function of the child. And as they got older, we're seeing this now, appetite and energy regulation become dysfunctional. So one of the things they think that's playing a big role in adult obesity and our inability to control weight has to do with risks that control our ability to read when we're full, control our energy intake, and its effect on the whole metabolism of the baby. Very interesting stuff. So you have genetics, what mom and dad give you, and that's just raw potential. And then epigenetics shapes how those genes are expressed. Really important change. It's changing the way we're looking at health in general and mental health. So what are the stresses during fetal life that we know are epigenetics? Well, it started out to be energy, as I said. They studied this events back in the 40s during World War II, and that started with the hunger thing. And then protein. But placental injury, that's the feeding tube for the baby. If the placenta doesn't have a completely good capacity, that baby is essentially getting poor nutrition, malnutrition. Blood flow. Corticosteroids is one of the fascinating stories. When you're under stress, the feeling, if you get a shock or a big stress, you tend to pour out epinephrine. You get shaky, you get wired. It's that fight or flight kind of thing that comes out. And that's a good thing if you're in danger or under some kind of an immediate threat. So fight or flight was built into our genes way, way, way back. But if those steroids, that fight or flight mechanism, stays around and you're constantly under that type of stress, those hormones begin to do big damage. Epinephrine and cortisol begin to do big damage, and not just to the mother, but to the baby as well. And that's one of the things that really has been shocking. Physical and mental stress in moms can lead to great problems in the baby in terms of bipolar disease, ADHD, depression, future problems, because this cortisol and adrenaline is constantly flowing around it as it's developing. Same thing was seen for, we all know toxins. We learned the smoking story. We've learned a lot of other things about toxins. One of the biggies that we're learning about now is blood sugar, because so many young women are coming into pregnancy overweight. They're gaining too much weight. They're not losing the weight between pregnancy, and as a result, the baby is seeing gestational diabetes, and blood sugar is extremely, extremely toxic to the child during development. Really interesting set of things. Only about a decade or two where we've put all this story together. So an adverse event is a stress on not just the mother, but the baby. So the first thing I want you to realize is how important it is. How important it is that we do nutrition right for pregnant females. We have got to do a good job on nutrition, weight balance, and physical fitness in mom in order to set the trajectory right for baby. So there's really three things that we got to worry about, and not just one. In our state, we have a terrible, terrible record for premature birth and early child morbidity and death. So one of the things that we've learned from this is that we now have to think about, always pushing the wrong one here. We have to worry about mom's health. And as a result of poor nutrition during pregnancy, mom's health is threatened over the long term. We got to worry about the pregnancy outcome. We don't want the baby born early, and we don't want the baby born susceptible to problems. And then we got to worry now about the future child health as well, because we realize what happens in pregnancy is a risk factor for life. So we've got to hit our marks on the pregnant female. We absolutely have to do good nutrition. Okay, so let's pretend that mom did everything right and everything's hunky-dory. During pregnancy, what happens with the brain is that it lays down, it starts immediately in the first few weeks of pregnancy. You see the spinal cord begin to form and the brain begins to form. But at birth, the brain is fully ready to go. 85 billion brain cells, all set to go. But they're not functional until after birth. And what happens after birth is absolutely spectacular. So here on this panel, I don't know if you can see it, but just look at the yellowness of the panel. This far left panel, you see a lot of yellow and almost no black. And what that is 85 billion brain cells ready to go, but they're not connected. These black connections here are cell-to-cell connections between brain cells. Well, what you see is an immediate cluster of connectivity. So what happens is that baby comes out and all 5 senses are immediately in the operating room bombarded with information. They're getting sensations of temperature, of smell, of sight, of sound. You know, things are happening all of a sudden. And the brain begins to immediately start connecting one to another very fast. The brain doubles in size by the end of year 1, and it triples in size by the end of year 3. And it's all connectivity. By the end of year 3, it looks almost black with connections between those cells. So those cells have looked at this world as a possible, and they're starting to make connections. What do I need to know? How do I need to get it working? They make all these connections, and then an interesting thing happens. At age 3, we have the most connections between brain cells that we ever have, the most. And then we start a process of pruning away the ones that we don't need. And by adulthood, 50% of them are gone. If you can see this panel, what you notice about the one on the right is that the ones that are left are thicker and blacker and denser. And what that means is that the person has used these connections between these brain cells over and over and over again and made them stronger and stronger. And the ones they don't use, they throw away. Well, this is a huge story, because what this means is that if things go really well for the child with all these possibilities, they have made these connections strong that help them function in their world. If that world is a negative world and it's full of adverse problems and poor experiences, those are the connections that they lay down. So it's an either or, and it's a real important game that's being played out right here in the first few years of life. So we were talking, Janet and I were talking about the terrible twos. The brain doesn't develop all at one time. It develops in spurts, kind of evolutionarily. You know, the brain is set up where the base of the brain is, that brain stem is very primitive. It helps us with breathing and heart rate and everything, very primitive stuff. And then the midbrain, layered over that, was next to develop. And it has a lot to do with emotionality. This is our emotions. It's where fear and anxiety are. It's what keeps a baby animal alive, is that midbrain. And it's a section of the brain called the amygdala, and that's our emotional center. It's very much connected with our memory center, the hippocampus, so that if you have big emotional anxiety-producing events in your life, you remember those, because it's important for survival. Well, that's great. That's just hunky-dory for little baby animals, but when you're a mom and a dad and you've got a kid who's 2, what you see is this irrational Tasmanian devil. So you're just like, whoa, what is happening to this kid? What happens is that amygdala develops first. It gets a lot of very explosive development. And what happens is, you see, this is what the amygdala does. Emotional outbursts. Fear, anxiety, very impulsive. It's a very immediate center. Something is coming at me, I'm going to react to it. It's very much stress related, and it's very much the first reaction. They're not thinking about anything, they react. It's just an immediate reaction. This is where the stress hormones
play a big role. Because the stress hormones are right there next to the amygdala. Something happens that causes anxiety or fear. Cortisol and adrenaline pour out into that kid. Well, they do that all the time. You know, they're sitting there perfectly calm. You tell them no, they can't do something. They collapse on the floor, screaming and crying. You know, stress hormones all over the place. And if you know this is going on, it's actually kind of funny. But if you don't understand what's going on, it really kind of makes you upset. Watching some kid on the airplane the other day was just having a fit. So this is the life of the young parent. You've got this 2-year-old who's got this midbrain, this amygdala that is out of control with growth. And nothing's really keeping it under control. Because the part that brings it under control is the part that makes us human. This was the part of the brain, the front brain, that really started to develop a few million years ago and really reached its peak about 200,000 years ago. The front brain, it controls, it is where intelligence and personality reside. But look at the different attributes of the front brain. First of all, it develops slowly, and it takes practice. You have to keep doing stuff to learn how to do this. It's a calculating part of the brain. It plans ahead. It thinks before it acts. It can multitask, and every one of you in the room has mastered this a long time ago, where you have many, many things on your plate, and you're constantly jumping back and forth. You're worrying about home life, you're worrying about what's on your computer, you're trying to do Pinterest. It's hard, you know, it's hard to do. This is very logical, very organized. So the first thing that happens when this part of the brain develops, the front brain develops, it begins around 3 and then begins to kind of slowly acquire its skills. First thing it does is it clamps down on the amygdala in the midbrain. It controls emotion, and that is one of the most important skills that a 2- and 3-year-old learns, how to control their emotion. That's a front brain activity. That's number 1. Then it learns to take information and play with that information. And then it learns to do all these other things, multitask, asking themselves, what if? What if I do that? What if I jump down these last 5 stairs? You know, what happened to me before? Gonna be bad. Something bad's gonna happen. And then, where's the other place that the midbrain, the other time of life, the midbrain grows really fast, the amygdala grows really fast? Teen years. So the terrible 2s and the terrible teens share that in common, is the amygdala grows very quickly in adolescence, and it far outstrips this part of the brain, which has to acquire adult skills. The first skill is it's got to control emotions. So adolescents go through this again, and you can see it. I had 3 kids, went through teenage years. You can see the brain going through these developmental steps. When does the brain finally reach full adulthood? It's about age 25. And if you have a 20-year-old or something, I'll tell you, it's quite astonishing, the difference between a 20-year-old and a 25-year-old. And it has to do with this. You can actually see it in the way they think and approach life. In the middle of all this, and I'm going to bring this up because we're going to come back to this later, in the middle of all this is quite a remarkable piece of the brain. The hippocampus is our memory center. We have a number of memory centers that do different types of memory, but this one does a couple of really important types of memory for us. One of them is spatial, so if you're challenged when you come into a city and you never know which direction is north, south, east, or west, it's your hippocampus that isn't working quite right. But the other one that it does is called relational memory. If I put a bunch of stuff on the tables here and I ask you to memorize it, that's one part of the brain, and you just memorize what you see. But if I ask you to memorize something or look at something in relation to something else and remember that connection between the two, that's the hippocampus. And if you think about it, that's what all learning is. I'm going to give you a piece of information, and I want you to put that information in relation to everything you've seen before. So this becomes a big player in cognition, the ability to think, and the ability to do what we're asking kids to do in school and all the way up into work. What's cool about this that we've learned, When I was in school, all the way through the 90s, we were taught that you got those 85 billion brain cells at birth, and we don't make any new ones. So if you do something and they're damaged, they're gone. But it's not quite true. There are two areas of the brain that make new cells regularly. One of them is the cerebellum in the back, and the other is the hippocampus. And that began to change the way neurobiologists thought about the brain, because this is a highly metabolic, it uses a lot of glucose and a lot of oxygen during the day. It really, really is plastic. And what's interesting about it is you can make this bigger by using it in the right way. So if you use the hippocampus, particularly in relation to that front brain, in terms of thinking, it tends to get more cells, more blood, more glucose, more oxygen, and becomes far more efficient at doing memory. So this is a real key thing. Our lifestyle really has a lot to do with how well that hippocampus works. So that's the setup of the brain. 2-year-old, midbrain, amygdala, highly emotional, and slowly with practice and with modeling from working with adults, the front brain begins to take control and begins the process of learning how to think and interact with the world in a very structured way. One of the things we learn is that stress is what shapes the brain. So remember all those cells, they're sitting there with no connections, and then by age 3 there's like tons and tons of connections. What they've learned is that it's everyday stresses that are forcing those connections to take place. Think about the newborn baby. They cry in the operating room because all this stuff is hitting them that's brand new. They're freezing cold, it's bright, there's people talking. They don't know what to make of all that stuff. Those are kind of stresses that are positive. They form connections in the brain. So if I look at a child and I see them struggling to walk, and they fall down, and they fall down, and they fall down, and they keep getting back up to do it, those are positive stresses. They may cry, but you pat them on the back, they get up, they do it again and again, until they master that challenge, and they learn that, okay, you put a challenge in front of me, I can get around it. I know I can get around it, I just got to stick with it, and I'll figure out how to get around that challenge. That's a positive thing. That's the thing that shapes a child as they grow. But you all know, and you're here for a really good reason, because you know that there are stresses in people's lives that are not positive and are not good, and they don't do great things to the brain either. Hunger and malnutrition is one of them. Food insecurity, it isn't just that I don't have food or that I'm hungry. The problem with food insecurity is it's a classic toxic stressor, in that the child has no control over it and can't predict whether or not a meal's going to be there. Can't predict when a meal's going to be there. And so the kids who are food insecure live in a very uncertain world. They have a lot of cortisol and adrenaline, a lot of stress hormones going all the time because of that unknown. And you see the same thing in kids that have chronic illnesses or suffer injury or trauma. This really is the big kahuna. Violence, neglect, abuse, those are major, major stresses. They will pull out cortisol and adrenaline and cause the brain to change dramatically. And then family chaos is another one. And when you talk about the recession we went through, think about that, or think about Hurricane Katrina or something happening. The whole fabric of the family was stressed. Everybody was stressed. And in case of Katrina, kids were suddenly not in their home, not in their neighborhood, not in their church, not in their school, gone someplace else, mom and dad lost their job. I mean, all these things, family chaos can be a powerful stressor for the child. And then environmental toxins and things we know also cause stress to the child, sometimes in an unknown way. What happens with those kind of stresses? Very different from a positive stress. In these cases, they call them toxic stresses, and when they've looked at these adverse childhood events, kids who really have gone through the ringer with one thing after another, a lot of problems in their life, a lot of family chaos or violence or whatever, those kids, when they follow those ACEs cause a very different personality to form. This is the kid who gets that midbrain fully developed, and never gets the front brain to come back in control. Like I said, these are the ones who, the connections between the brain cells are the negative connections. Fear, anxiety, over and over again, those brain connections get thicker and thicker and stronger. So when they start to prune away all the ones that they don't use, they're pruning away the ones that help them think, interact socially, be calm, be able to control themselves, and you end up with essentially a midbrain personality. Anxious, emotional, fearful, withdraw, socially ill-equipped. They don't do well in classrooms and things. These are kids who are going to have trouble all the rest of their life. The trajectory of their life has changed. So they got their genes from mom and dad, but it's the events afterward that altered the trajectory of their life in terms of learning, academic outcomes, social, their job outcomes, their ability to function, and later, as we're learning now, their health and mental health outcomes. These kids get in trouble in adulthood in a big way. These are really, really in trouble over time. So adverse childhood events in the young child, in the early childhood, you look at school age, social, emotional, and cognitive development is impaired. They don't do well. You look at their adolescence, these are the ones that adopt risky behaviors. Alcohol, drugs, they don't wear seat belts, they smoke, they do all kinds of things. They're the ones who get disease and disability when they're older, and they have early death. They don't live as long because of that chronic stress essentially ages them very, very quickly. So what do we got on our side? So we got this separation, and we know kids born and they have two directions they could go. Good direction, and they could go bad direction. Well, this little baby rat pup taught us an amazing thing. Around the year 2000, Michael Meany in Canada, his lab techs had to handle baby rats every day. Baby rats don't like being handled, and they don't like being taken away from mom and the rest of the group. But they had to be weighed and measured every day, and so the lab techs would take them out, weigh them and measure them and put them back. And the techs told Meany, it's really interesting, if I put this baby back, some of the mothers rush over and lick and groom that baby and calm the baby down. And then the baby, they watch them, the little baby rat would then go out and start doing what they did before. They're playing. They went in, they explored their little cage, they played with their friends, they did that. They said, though, that not all of the moms did that. There was another group who were low lickers and groomers who essentially left the kid after they were dropped off and didn't spend much time with the baby. Well, what happened to those babies, the techs told them, those babies don't go back and play. They're afraid, they stay in the corner, and they just kind of hole up by themselves. So Meany began to explore that, and what he found was if you follow the ones whose moms were high lickers and groomers, they had greater exploration, curiosity, socialization, were healthier, less anxious, and less aggressive as they got older. But the ones from the low licking and grooming were aggressive, antisocial, unhealthy, lived a shorter lifespan, did not do well in the group. He thought, what is the difference between these two? And what he found was stress hormones. He could measure them. The cortisol level in a baby was sky high when that giant hand came down and picked it up. You can imagine, whoo, you're sitting here and this hand comes down and pulls you out of the cage. Stress hormones on the ceiling, baby's going crazy. When they measured those, they could see that cortisol. But during the licking and grooming, they could see cortisol drop immediately in that baby. And it came right back down to baseline, and that baby did fine. Low licking and grooming, that cortisol got up and had a long tail and never quite came back down to baseline for hours. So that kid was essentially bathed in cortisol and adrenaline all the time. So when that baby's making connections in the brain, what are the connections that are going to get big and thick and strong? It's those. It's the ones that have fear and anxiety, and they could see that it happened. Well, Meany, following his name, did a real interesting experiment where he switched moms on these babies. And what he found was, interestingly enough, it was not the biological bond of mother and child. It was the licking and grooming that made the difference. And what that suddenly told pediatricians was, Wow. That means I can't do everything for everybody. I can't solve poverty. I can't stop drug abuse and violence and other things and make it all go away for this kid. But what it said was, it doesn't have to be mom and dad. Who else could do that job? Grandparents can do it. Siblings can do it. Preschool teachers can do it. Anybody in the thing. In fact, it's interesting, I remember in the interview, some of these kids have just had horrible lives. The people they identify that made a difference are people who probably don't even realize they made a difference. The lunch lady sometimes is nice to them and smiles at them, and it makes all the difference in the world. That is licking and grooming that kid. It's something that makes them feel protected. Somebody's got my back. When I face a challenge, somebody's back me. That's important stuff. So we can build social and emotional buffers around the child. This is brand new stuff that we are changing the way we even look at what pediatrics is. How do we figure out how to translate this skill set to a child early in life so that no matter what happens, they've got the skills that can protect them, make them resilient, make them bounce back, and not be afraid. So this can be learned through experience. It's modeled by others around them. This is that front brain. You've got to train the front brain. It doesn't just happen automatically. It turns off stress hormones, and when they follow these kids out that have a lot of these skills, self-regulation, coping, persistence, organization, planning, multitasking, so-called executive function, those kids do way better in school, and they're much better socially. It's the equivalent of licking and grooming, and we've got to figure out where are we going to get the adults in their world, every kid's world, to make sure that this happens. So we're asking the front brain to do three things. Pay attention, quiet down the midbrain, quiet down that kind of stress emotional center, calm down, don't be distracted, work on an idea. I'm going to give you an idea, and I want you to take your memory center and pull out everything you know and put this new idea in relation to what you know before. That's a hippocampus thing, that's a memory center, that's how we learn. And then adjust thinking. You've got to be able to take something that you're facing, and you've got to be able to walk all around and say, well, what if this, what if this, what if this? This is the front brain at work, and it has to come in order for the child to learn successfully. So that's the brain piece of it, and that's the equipment piece, and that's how it develops, and that's how the kid gets to a certain point. Now I want to talk about nutrition specifically and what it's doing in the brain. First thing you got to know is the brain is a sponge for calories. About 20% of the calories we take in, 1 out of every 5, is burned in the brain, not in the body. So it's an amazing thing that you can be at a computer all day, not moving and just sitting there, drinking coffee, and still feel hypoglycemic after a while. And the reason is that your brain is really using a lot of energy to do what we do. So I want to show you this because this is important when it comes to what you're talking about in terms of hunger and food insecurity, and we're talking about in terms of children in school and learning. Here's a brain scan here, and for those of you who are blissfully ignorant of scans, you essentially have to lie on the floor and look up. And it's cut this way through the brain. And this is a so-called MRI. This is the front of the brain, the back of the brain, and here's the middle of the brain where the spinal column comes in down here. What this is a set of adults who were fasted for 36 hours, so big time, long-term fast with these people. And what you see, what's lighting up here? Well, if this is the front of the brain and this is the back of the brain, what's lighting up right here is the midbrain. And that emotional center is essentially constantly telling these people, I'm hungry, I need glucose, go get something right now. And the longer you're fasted, the more loud and persistent that is. But what you notice here is that there's nothing else lighting up. It's the midbrain, it's looking for food, it needs something. This is a distracted, irritable, restless, anxious person. And you've all experienced this where you get to a point you haven't eaten in a long time and you don't feel well. You don't know exactly what's going on, but you don't feel right. Your hands get a little shaky, you seem a little, unable to concentrate, you're not doing well. When you feed a person then right after that, these are the 36, the compilation of the 36, look what lights up. It's the front brain. And it lights up and the midbrain quiets down. This is working mode. This is a calm, focused, organized, thoughtful person. They're not distracted by all the emotional stuff and all the food seeking. They're not worried about stuff. There's no anxiety. This is somebody who's ready to learn. When you think about a kid coming from home and into school after fasting all night long, if that kid doesn't get breakfast, that kid doesn't have this look, that kid has that look. And if it's a chronic problem for that kid, you can't ask this child to learn algebra easily. It's a real hard thing for that kid. So a pretty simple thing. First thing you do is supply them with nutrition on a consistent basis every single day, particularly breakfast, and you'll get a different learner in the classroom. Well, if you look at all the studies on what the brain and what nutrition do together, you find that a good diet, not just any diet, we're not talking about Cinnabons and Mountain Dew, the high school diet, that's the high school diet. What you find is more brain cells, particularly in the hippocampus, it builds more brain cells. Stronger connections, bigger, thicker connections between the neurons, faster. These neurons have electrical connections between each other, and it's like an electrical wire that's coated. The speed of processing information is dependent on thickness of the coating. This is a fairly recent finding, and one of the points I think you should take away is there's a lot more that we don't know than that we do know. So it's not about getting in omega-3s, it's better to get in the whole fish than to get in the omega-3 capsule, because there's so much we don't know and there's so much more we get from the fish and the vegetables and the fruit. Okay, so we talked about the war on poverty began in the 60s with the shocking news that there was kids who were hungry in this country, and we're still looking at 1 in 5 children who are food insecure. And this is declared a failure by many people, but I think part of the problem is they're not recognizing that these are things that come and go, come and go. These are not the same kids over and over. They're circumstantial kids, and they're kids who kind of have this long-term poverty. But 51% of the kids in the country now qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So it's not like we're a wealthy country. 1% is wealthy, but the rest of the country has a pretty modest income, and there are at-risk kids who will bounce in and out of this number depending on circumstance of the family. So if the family's car breaks down, they got a problem. They've got rent, they've got food, they've got light, they've got all this stuff they have to get to work. They have to figure out how to deal with that. And that's how kids move in and out, easily move in and out of food insecurity. It's associated with a lot of problems, particularly cognitive outcomes and academic success are poor among kids who are poor. This is the most terrifying thing in pediatrics as far as I'm concerned. When you think about summertime, for a kid like me, it was like Disney World for 3 months. I loved summertime. I just thought it was great. I played baseball every day. It was great. But if you listen to people speak, I listened to Howie Long speak, and I listened to Viola Davis, talk the other day, and you talk about somebody that grew up in abject poverty, no food in the refrigerator, nothing. It was just awful. For those kids, when they look at summertime, that's a really different thing. This is a big stress, big anxiety. Howie Long said, I didn't know for the next 3 months when or if I was going to eat. So every day, that is a stress that is constantly working on them. Those are where the stress hormones begin to come, and that's where trouble starts. So one of the biggest things we're doing now, and food banks are a huge part of it, is figuring out how to get food programs and food pantries to link up with kids in their neighborhoods in the summertime. We've got to do something to protect these kids from that. And just the point is, these little differences, we talked about this. Everybody's born with their genes, and the genes are potential. And what we want, all we're asking is to optimize the potential for every kid and not let these little things like socioeconomics and educational and cultural things, slowly over time, during pregnancy and the diet and the activities and experiences, these things become health disparities. When you look at the difference over time, the trajectory of one kid versus the trajectory of another, even if they're in the same neighborhood, we can overcome these. That's what the studies have shown. We can overcome these by doing the right things. And the big three were health, not just giving them a Medicaid card, but making sure they got the health care they needed. 2, nutrition, every single day, steady, quality nutrition. And 3 was social and emotional skill development. Some adult needed to be there to help them. When you look at child care, and you look at kids who had that kind of child care, irrespective of this, you were able to stop that. You look at them as adults, they don't have heart disease, obesity, lipid problems, hypertension. They're not the ones who get into trouble and die young. And it's not because they weren't socioeconomically challenged, it's because we figured out how to get around it. Critical thing for us. One of the things we built, and I was really proud of this during the recession, was the nutrition safety net that we put under children. We have it all the way down, and this is the new one. Child and Adult Care Food Program has been upgraded where the standards of these programs are more and more adjusted to the dietary guidelines for Americans. So the quality of nutrition in these programs is much, much better than it was previously. School meal programs are probably the most powerful programs we have for kids in nutrition outside of WIC. WIC is a biggie. Covers mom during pregnancy, covers baby during particularly the first year, but all the way up to 5 years for high-risk kids. WIC is a program we should never defund. That's a really powerful program. But we got things like after-school programs. We have summer meal program. USDA has done a lot to make sure that that 50% of the population who are free and reduced have the ability to get this food. The problem isn't that we don't have the program. The problem is that we don't have access to that program set up. And that's really our challenge going forward. How do we get this during vacation, summer meals and stuff? How do we make sure that these things get to the kids and the kids are in these programs? So if you go to school for a minute, this is the part of nutrition that I've been interested in for a long, long time. 55 million students, 32 million lunches a day. That's a lot of lunch right there. 10 million breakfasts. So a lot of calories, and this is the literature we've gotten lately. We've been able to pull information that it improves diet quality, it lessens obesity risk. I hear people carping on school food all the time. Oh my God, school food caused the obesity epidemic. Far from it. The obesity epidemic was caused by home food. And it improves classroom behavior, and it boosts academic achievement, particularly among the highest risk kids, the poor kids. So this is one way that we know I can put a better student in the chair. Irrespective of all the other stuff in their life, I can do a better job if I give them nutrition. Breakfast is unique. I showed you that brain scan. If you don't pay attention to that brain scan, that's the kid who's going to be the biggest problem in the classroom. They're going to be impulsive. They're going to act out. Teacher's going to come to you and say they need ADHD medication. The truth of the matter is they need to eat. And so one of the things that this study did is it looked at 45 different studies and said, what can we learn from breakfast studies? And the researcher was distraught over the fact that in these 45 studies, they had different age groups, different breakfasts, different timing, different outcomes, all this stuff. She was kind of at a loss. She had just tables and tables that described the study, but there wasn't a common thread, except for one thing, that almost every single study in that 45 had a positive outcome. No matter what they measured, or no matter what the breakfast, or the timing, or the age group, whether it was adult or child, everybody got a benefit, but the real benefit came to the most vulnerable kids. Poor kids got the most out of having breakfast. Better attention, particularly late morning, it gave them that tail of nutrition that protected the brain. And they did much, much better on difficult tasks, including math tasks. Well, here's the problem. So we got the program, we got the money, it's set aside, we know the kids, and yet only a third of eligible kids, free and reduced kids, get a breakfast at school. Doesn't mean they don't get breakfast, but it's worrisome. One program in Philadelphia, they put in a universal breakfast in the school. It doubled the number of kids who ate breakfast every day. You got to figure there's a lot of those kids that weren't getting breakfast at all. One of the things we learned, and this came from Share Our Strength, Janet's old group, they work with Deloitte, which is a research company, and Deloitte looked at all the studies in terms of cognition, and they said, these kids are less hungry during school, fewer behavioral problems. I'm a teacher, I'm feeding that kid. I'll feed him with my own money. Increased attendance and less tardiness, one of the great things they've learned. Fewer visits to the school nurse, lower obesity, higher math scores, and graduation rates were 18% higher among kids who consistently got breakfast at school. So if you know this, and we've got the data now, we need to figure out how to make policy work for us. We've got the program, we need the kids to be in the program. Innovations have occurred around meals in the classroom. This is a great idea for a lot of reasons. One reason, they get a good breakfast in the classroom. We know that the quality is good. Two, they have it with their friends, and they've got this social and emotional connection during the beginning of the school day. And three, what's that teacher doing? She's licking and grooming. She's got her hand on this girl's back, and that's really important. You know, teachers don't have time. But if you give them this 10 minutes of breakfast where they're eating there, they'll find the kid who's in trouble. And they'll just put a hand on the back, licking and grooming. That may be all it needs for that kid to get over whatever stress they're under. Really important. And the other thing is that one of the studies showed that the closer to learning you feed a kid, the better their learning is. So it may not be good enough if this little girl had breakfast at 6:30 or 7, and you're testing her at 11, and you're trying to get her to learn a complex subject. What you want is that nutrition to still be there in the late morning. So that's nutrition. The other side of nutrition is activity, and I look at nutrition, physical activity, and food as being part of the same thing. They are directly connected as to how much food you can eat for sure, but they have different ways of working. Cognition is improved by activity in a way that works directly on these things: blood flow, glucose, oxygen, growth factors in the brain, and therefore new neurogenesis, a fancy term for new cell development. So when I'm trying to build the brain memory center, the hippocampus, this is one of the best ways to do that. Let me just show you a couple of things. Here's the Fit Kids study. Here's the hippocampus in the middle of the brain. This group get an hour of exercise and activity after school every single day. This group are on the waiting list to get into that program, but weren't yet in it. So the first thing they did is they showed that this group is more physically fit. They have better oxygen capacity. Then they showed that when they measured the hippocampus, it actually was bigger in the kids who were physically fit, and not a little bit bigger, a lot bigger. It actually grew. And then when they tested them, they found those kids had a better memory for that relational memory that we were talking about. Here's another one. This was even more challenging because they used an obese population of children. I can show you their studies on adults are the same. They're showing the same type of thing, but I picked these kids because I thought this one was interesting. Obesity does something to the speed of cognitive processing. It slows it down. Don't know why. It's just one of the many things that total body fat, particularly abdominal fat, does. So they took these kids who were obese and therefore at high risk for the problem, and they exercised them. And they looked at their brains first. And here's a composite of the brains of those kids. And you see a lot of activity. These are the motor activities because they had them out there exercising. You see those part of the brain. But you see right here, the PFC is that front brain. And you can see what's happened is blood flow has gone to the front brain following exercise. They then went on and did cognitive testing to see whether or not these kids had responded to physical exercise over time. And what they found was that all the traits of the front brain, organization, logic, multitasking, planning, all those things were dramatically improved. And when they tested math scores, those dramatically improved as well. Now what's important about this is a couple of things. One, this is a high-risk group of kids, and it proves the point that everybody gets a benefit from physical activity because it stimulates the brain. But the second thing, and this is a really important takeaway in America, they didn't make them skinny and then get the benefit. They got the benefit from the activity. We constantly talk about obesity in this country. We're obsessed with weight and obesity. That's not the target first. The first target is quality nutrition and physical activity. The benefits will happen irrespective of weight. That's crucial. We recognize the importance of these things. Okay, because I'm old, I'm starting to read this literature. It's such a drag. It's such a drag. But there's a couple of different ways you can age, and I just want to show you how gerontologists are thinking about aging in terms of the brain and the stuff we just talked about. One of them is this kind of a light, and the other is this kind of a light. And I think, you know, that it's so interesting, these studies. This is what gerontologists want for seniors. They want healthy aging. You can't stop the body, it's going to go down. But you can manage it so that you age in a healthy way. So what they want to do is promote health among seniors. They want to prevent the preventable, which I think is a great phrase. Prevent the preventable. Don't let somebody just go willy-nilly into the world. Look for things that might trip them up and stop them. When they do things that are unpreventable, manage those well. Don't let them fester. And then finally, limit disability, because disability is the domino that starts the whole thing falling. This is a slide, I won't go into great detail, but what they're showing here is independence versus dependence in seniors. And what they wanted to show is that the seniors coming along and everything's hunky-dory until they get like a urinary tract infection. It's a little infection, it's treated, but that little infection can make them dependent, and it can be difficult for them to come back to baseline again. Little tiny thing, you know, like that. Well, there's a lot of those little tiny things. Gum disease and inflammation in the body. Hip fracture's the biggie. What's the likelihood of getting back to normal after a hip fracture for a senior? 15%. So when you have a major event like that, that's preventing the preventable. When you have a major thing like that, it leads to frailty, and that particular stress changes everything. All of a sudden, they need drugs, they're bedridden, they can't move around, they gain weight, and it just starts a process that they can't get out from under. So one of the things we do with seniors is say, let's figure out what does it take to be a healthy, aging senior. And what it takes, you can't read these things, but it's lifelong healthy habits. It's the things we've talked about all along here, need to be started young and maintained. Nutritional health and physical health, so we need them to be active and we need them to eat well. Emotional well-being and social health, social and emotional skills. They need licking and grooming just like a 2-year-old needs licking and grooming. It doesn't go away just because you get older. In fact, this is one of the keys to preserving the ability of the senior to be independent and move around. And then finally, reduce stress. That's at the top of the pyramid, because stresses, both physical and mental, are the things that wear down the body, they wear down the mind, they cause chronic inflammation, and it leads to problems. So when they talk about seniors growing older, they still need the same things that we talked about before for kids. They need good nutrition and physical activity. They need good health care delivered in a timely way, and they need social and emotional skills around them. Social and emotional relations that protect them from the ups and downs of stress. Nutrition programs for seniors also exist. SNAP is one of our powerful ones that has come into play many times. Of course, they have Medicare. They have Social Security, which has been a godsend. You can imagine what that was like after the Depression without Social Security or Medicare. But they also have the Child and Adult Food Care Program for people who are disabled, seniors who are disabled, Meals on Wheels. They have a lot of programs to try and reach those seniors and maintain their, the older Americans nutrition program is one of the things that they've tried to focus on, ways of keeping them optimally healthy while they age. So I'll just show you real quickly physical activity and the hippocampus in seniors, kind of corresponding to our junior thing. Here's the left hippocampus and the right hippocampus. There it is right there in orange. And what they showed is that as they became more aerobically fit over time, you know, you saw this straight line effect. It does the same thing in seniors that it does in juniors. It causes the hippocampus to get bigger. It improves their memory skills and allows the speed of processing to be maintained over time. And it's interesting to me, it doesn't take very much. This is an interval walking program where what they did is they walked really fast for 3 minutes, then really moderate for 3 minutes, and they would do it 4 days a week. That's all. They did it for about 15 minutes or so, 20 minutes. And what they showed is that they got the same effect here in terms of aerobic conditioning as if they had sent the seniors to a gym for an hour. So it doesn't take a lot. It's like, just do something. It's one of the main things. And the last thing seniors have to remember, more so than anybody, they've got to do weight-bearing exercise. 1, to maintain muscle tone, 2, to maintain bone mass. One of the reasons that we fracture is that we haven't done a good job of nutrition in adolescence, and then we don't do good weight-bearing exercise. So for all of you out there who are doing hand gliding, move over here. Or do Arthur Miller here or something like that. That's what you want to do. But weight-bearing is really critical. These are the things that make a big difference. It's easier to get when you're younger because you're moving around and all this stuff. But when you get to be a senior, you actually have to work it into your day. And then other factors play an effect on bones besides just nutrition and obviously genetics and other things. But it takes a really pretty good diet in order to drive bone health. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next session that I'm in. But it really takes quite a bit to drive bone health, and you've got to hit your marks in terms of age. So we talked about a lot of stuff today, and I'm sorry to drag you through the science of the brain, but I think it's absolutely fascinating. It's utterly new. It's changing the way we look at what health is, and particularly what pediatrics is. So we used to think it was the genes, and we knew that social and economic things played a big role, but now we know that diet, play, social interactions for the child are critical if you're going to make that child reach their optimal potential. And we also know that their reaction to stress, their grit, and their attitude has everything to do, and I could show you a study, I didn't put it in here, where these kids get more years of school, do better in school, go to college 4 times more commonly, have a job that's 4 times better than their peers, are more healthy, and less likely to be in trouble as they age. These things are critical. And now that we know them, we've got to adjust policy. John was talking today about trying to recognize our mistakes and make new things, try new things. We've got to try them. The data is too strong to ignore. So small steps, diet quality, social, emotional, nutrition, and physical activity. That's where health is going forward. Thank you.
Now I'm optimistic. Wow, that is really exciting stuff, and I feel like we can take this kind of information, and we don't have to be the scientists, and go and kind of change what we do and think about what we're doing differently. Thank you.